In this segment, we're going to talk about formulating the change management strategy. The purpose is to develop the overarching approach for how an organization transitions from its current state to its future state. Change management strategy is typically designed to realize a set of goals to achieve specific organizational outcomes. Change management strategy details the scale, scope, and complexity of the change program and defines the requirements and implementation options, challenges, constraints, opportunities, success criteria, measurements, RACI or RACI, and governance for each change management activity needed to achieve successful and sustainable change implementation. It clarifies what needs to be done, why it needs to be done, who will do it, and when it will be done, and the expected outcome. It may also include resource and other cost requirements for the change program, such as tools or technology solutions used by the change team, marketing, communication, materials, or events. The change management strategy clearly states the case for change, sometimes referred to as the change case, and highlights program-specific approaches to develop and deliver all-in-scope change management work streams, which may include sponsor accountable and activity, leadership alignment, stakeholder engagement, communication, organization and process design, culture and behavioral change, impact assessment and management, readiness planning, learning and development, performance management, risk management, benefit realization, and sustainability management. The approach will be informed by the change diagnostics and assessments and engagement completed in 5.1 evaluate change impact and organizational readiness. The diagnostics and assessments provide data for the change strategy to be tailored to the organization or to specific areas of the organization and are cognizant of the level of impact of change, challenges to implementing the change, communication barriers and opportunities, critical success factors, and engagement requirements. Each organization will have unique constraints and opportunities that the change strategy must address. Key areas to be addressed by this change strategy include strength of the case for change. If the case for change is strong, well supported, and consistently communicated, then the level of risk will be lower because those affected will understand the need to make and commit to the required changes. If the strength of the case is weak, resulting in poor communication planning, low visibility, or minimal sponsorship support, then risks levels may be higher because those affected by the change will not buy in or accept the need to change. Inadequate change planning may result in poor adoption of the change, insufficient allocation of resources necessary to drive the change, and lack of credibility for the project. Sponsorship engagement. Clear and visible engagement and support from the sponsor has a direct impact on the success of the change. If the sponsor does not provide support, lacks active engagement in the change effort and activities, loses interest in the change efforts, or is distracted during the change efforts, then there should be intervention and risk management strategies in place to address the issue. Third, the degree that the success of the change depends on behavioral changes. Risk levels will be higher if change success depends on behavioral changes than if the change does not require behavioral changes, because behavioral changes are harder to make compared to learning a new system or process. Excuse me. Inadequate assessment of the behavioral change needed may result in a lack of skill and capability to do things differently and misalignment with change goals. Fourth, degree that the success of change depends on stakeholders learning a new skill. The risk assessment should indicate the degree which a change depends on the stakeholders learning a new skill. If stakeholders are capable of and have had experience in learning in the past, then the risk assessment should be lower. Fifth, the degree that the change affects stakeholders, customers, and vendors. The level of change required by stakeholders, customers, and vendors can affect the level of risk. A high level of change represents a high degree of risk. Change success is at a greater risk when customers and vendors are affected by the change. Sixth, the amount of change impact the change has on the organization's financial performance and health. Greater financial dependence on change success increases the risk of change success and will likely shorten the time available to adopt the change. Therefore, results will likely need to be achieved quickly. Seventh, the amount of prior experience the organization has with change. If the organization has past success with change and generally shows little resistance to change, then the risk should be lower. If the organization has past failures with change, then the risk should be higher. Eighth, organizational alignment. Misalignment of the organization's performance management practices, culture, organizational structure, and organizational design with the overall change management strategy may result in a lack of readiness for the change, poor or slow adoption of the change, or stakeholders reverting to old ways. And ninth, capacity for change. The overall ability to make the change, such as workload or other change initiatives based on environmental or timing factors. The change management strategy must be validated and approved by the change program sponsor and the appropriate program team and organizational leadership. It may also require approval from organizational leaders, partners, and subject matter experts provided input to the strategy. In complex transformational programs, there may be a wide audience for the change strategy, including employee, colleague, working councils, or third-party suppliers. The strategy review and approval process should be clearly defined as the change program governance documents. Questions to consider and respond to when developing the change management strategy may include: is the change incremental or transformational? Will the implementation be phased in or big bang? Will the transition be linear and sequential, or will it require a multifaceted, nonlinear, non-sequential approach? How prepared is the organization for the change? What are the known and anticipated areas of resistance, and what mechanisms will be used to overcome them? What operational adjustments will be required to facilitate adoption of the change with minimal disruption? What mechanisms will be used to ensure the workforce has or acquires the skills and competencies required? Will technology components be required to facilitate the transition? If so, how will they be incorporated? How will workforce adjustments logistics be managed? What mechanisms will be used to ensure that necessary behaviors and attitudes have been adopted? And how will progress be monitored? Next, we'll look at developing the communication strategy. The purpose of developing the communication strategy is to create a strategy that, when executed, ensures that the organization and its customers are aware of and understand the organizational rationale for the change. It ensures that stakeholders are aligned regarding the program, expected value and benefits to the organization, initiation, progress, challenges, achievements, completion, and realized benefits. The communication strategy includes the defined business rationale or case for change, stakeholders and sponsors, identified audiences, audience segmentation and audience needs, targeted stakeholder messaging, identified communication channels and messaging frequency, identified feedback channels and loops, and communication governance and review process. The communication strategy should include the business rationale for what, why, who, how, and when changes are taking place. It should provide the information detail necessary to enable change sponsors and the target audience to understand the key messages, channels, and frequency that the messages will be delivered during the change execution. Successful communication of the case for change occurs when business rationale communications are sufficiently enough that each type and level of stakeholder can clearly articulate what is changing, how the change benefits or affects the organization, and how the change affects him or her individually, often referred to as what's in it for me. If people see progress they can relate to, then they are more likely to continue the change effort and help to reach the future state and sustain the change. Guiding principles for communication managers. The communication strategy should provide guiding principles for communicating messages. A message is a simple and clear idea and should summarize the essence of the change. Effective messaging means communicating to the right audience, right message through the right channels. Messages should be relevant and appropriate to the audience, and there should be continuity across the messages. Using storytelling techniques that include interesting narratives, human interest stories, and arresting imagery will assist in communicating the message to the target audience. Identifying communication channels and information flow. The stakeholder group and sponsors should depict where and how information is shared within their respective organizations by mapping how communications will work throughout the organization. Channels for both formal and informal communication should be noted, and opportunities should be identified to include, leverage, and reinforce message content. Other considerations for an effective communication strategy include tailoring the communication activities to the needs, using message feedback, using push-pull interactive communications, determining the best communication strategies, vertical, horizontal, verbal, nonverbal, informal, formal, oral, written, official, unofficial, internal, external. Communication governance and review process. Communication processes within organizations can have complex structures with review and validation required for a number of groups. For example, internal and external enterprise communication, legal, risk, and compliance teams, particularly where communications affect customers or third parties. Communication strategy should include the roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, resources, and timelines for communication content review and sign-off prior to publication. Inputs include change definition, change impact assessment, current communication channels, tools, and methods, organizational change readiness assessment, project charter and project documentation, stakeholder analysis, and vision statement. Outputs will be the communication strategy. Next, let's look at developing the sponsorship strategy. The purpose of developing the sponsorship strategy is to create a high-level approach for preparing and leveraging the sponsors to promote, gain support for, and drive adoption of a change. Responsibility for developing the sponsorship strategy should be assigned to the change management lead and include input from others who have knowledge and experience with sponsors. You should describe why the sponsors are important. The sponsorship strategy should outline why they're so critical to the success of a change effort. Sponsors are critical to change because stakeholders want to learn about the change and the reasons for change from the sponsors. The importance stakeholders place in a change effort may be determined by the importance that sponsors demonstrate. Sponsors build support for the change at all levels of the organization. Sponsors can support identifying and mitigating risks associated with resistance to the change. Sponsors provide the resources and budget, set expectations, and hold organizations and individuals accountable during the change. Sponsors break down barriers and remove obstacles that restrict change implementation. Sponsors provide consistent, high-level messaging during the change program. Developing a high-level approach for gaining sponsorship commitment. Sponsorship gaps that must be addressed for successful adoption of the change should be identified, and a high-level approach for addressing the gaps should be developed as early as possible. This high-level approach includes the activities to build a coalition of sponsorship that will drive and support the sponsorship strategy. Risks to consider include a lack of sponsorship commitment, support for the change, sponsorship competency gaps, and past sponsorship challenges. Inputs include change risks, organizational change readiness assessment, sponsorship alignment assessment, and stakeholder analysis. Outputs include sponsorship strategy. Next, we're going to look at stakeholder engagement strategy. Its purpose is to identify an approach to ensure that individuals or groups impacted by a change and those who could positively affect the overall success of the change are engaged in the change effort. The core of stakeholder management and engagement includes taking the appropriate steps to identify stakeholders, include conducting a stakeholder analysis, identifying the required engagement of the various stakeholders, and identifying the activities needed to achieve the required engagement. Change stakeholders can be numerous and range from internal stakeholders like employees whose jobs are impacted by the changes to external stakeholders like customers or clients who might see or experience something differently because of the changes. A stakeholder engagement strategy may not be appropriate for all change management efforts, but in more complex, large-scale change efforts, developing an overall direction and approach for stakeholder engagement helps to align and integrate stakeholder engagement plans, activities, requirements, and metrics. Stakeholder engagement requires the attention and involvement of the people who will be impacted by the changes or can influence the success of the changes and focuses on what the stakeholders and stakeholder groups need to know about the change and what they need to do. Good stakeholder engagement attracts and holds the attention of stakeholders to the degree needed for change success. The degree and type of stakeholder involvement required varies based on variables such as time, resource availability, negotiable elements within the future state, change management strategy, directive versus collaborative, and stakeholder role. Depending on the change, a stakeholder engagement strategy could include the identification of key stakeholders, prioritization of stakeholders, references to a stakeholder analysis, required stakeholder commitments, and methods for and appropriateness of soliciting stakeholder input. Inputs include current state analysis, change impact assessment, current communication channels, tools, and methods, communication strategy, sponsorship strategy, stakeholder analysis. Outputs include stakeholder engagement strategy. This next section will look at developing the change impact and readiness strategy. Its purpose is to define the approach, scope, roles, and responsibilities in undertaking the detailed impact analysis and readiness planning for implementing the change. Understanding the specific impacts on people, processes, tools, organizational structure, job roles, and technology will inform all areas of the change strategy and is critical for developing the training strategy and readiness strategy. Readiness strategy focuses on what actions and activities need to be completed in advance of the change being implemented. It includes the readiness criteria for implementation, the governance structure, and the accountability for readiness activities that will determine if the organization is ready to accept the change. Readiness management is a critical activity that supports projects meeting key pre-implementation milestones and ensures a smooth transition to new ways of working. Inputs include stakeholder engagement strategy, change impact assessment. Outputs include change impact and readiness strategy. Next, we'll look at developing the learning and development strategy. Its purpose is to define the knowledge, skills, and competencies required for stakeholders to adopt the change, which informs creation and delivery of learning and development programs and training courses. The key components that the learning and development strategy identify are the skills and competencies needed to perform in the changed environment, those needing training to close the competency gap, the competency to be delivered, and the methodology of delivery and methods to determine the effectiveness of the training. Demonstrating the need. The learning and development strategy should document what stakeholders must be able to do differently because of the change and how they need to be able to work to be successful in the future state. The strategy ensures that impacted stakeholders are equipped with the necessary knowledge, skills, and abilities to achieve the future state. Defining a high-level approach. The learning and development strategy should define a high-level approach that ensures understanding of the intended work effort. Explaining different learning and development methods and tools. The learning and development method is dependent upon the type of change and culture of the organization. It should identify the most effective learning and development methods and tools when defining a high-level approach. Key learning and development methods and tools include instructor-led, face-to-face and virtual, computer-based, webcasts or podcasts, role plays, simulations, on-the-job, and gamification. Identifying potential resources. Some organizations have internal learning and development departments that can be leveraged to conduct the learning and development. Other organizations will rely on external consulting expertise or outsourcing to conduct these activities. The high-level approach should outline the resourcing plan to conduct the learning and development activities. Estimating a timeline. The high-level plan should include an estimated timeline for learning and development that aligns with the project schedule. Learning and development should be close enough to the actual change that stakeholders will remember, learn, and be able to transfer the new skills to their jobs. Identifying proposed deliverables. The expected learning and development deliverables and supporting material need to be defined in a learning and development strategy. This will establish the work effort expected to complete learning and development. Deliverables may include a learning development plan, curriculum, materials, for example, user manuals and quick reference guides, and an evaluation. Key considerations in defining the learning and development approach may include license costs for training tools, commissioning training environments to deliver training to new technical or digital solutions, data used in training material and any data privacy requirements, an approach of piloting the training in advance of deployment to ensure it is fit for purpose, governance for sign-off of training content, particularly if there is a legal or regulatory requirement, an approach to transitioning training from the change program to business as usual training, including knowledge transfer and management. Determining evaluation techniques. There are a wide variety of approaches and techniques to evaluate learning activities. Learning and development strategy should explain the importance of evaluating learning and development and how it should be approached. Measuring the success of a learning and development program demonstrates whether the participants learn the skills needed. Learning objectives should be used to define training content and measure adoption after training. Identifying the objectives of the learning and development program prior to delivery also enable the change practitioner to evaluate adoption success after training completion. Inputs include learning needs assessment, stakeholder analysis. Outputs include learning and development strategy. Next, we will look at develop the measurement and benefit realization strategy. Its purpose is to define success criteria and measures to monitor whether the change is achieving the expected benefits to adapt the change as needed. It's important to begin measuring as early as possible in the life cycle of the effort. This provides timely information to gauge the effectiveness of the change strategy, keeps the change implementation on track, allowing for course correction, and ensures that the organizational benefits defined in the project charter are realized. Developing the measurement strategy. Change objectives and goals should be used to determine what is required to achieve the future state. These targets should be specific and quantifiable for the organization to understand what is expected. Another aspect of the measurement strategy is to assess the effectiveness of the strategy used to drive the change effort itself. Common areas of focus include communication and learning to allow for refinement as needed. Techniques can include stakeholder surveys and feedback from line managers, change agents, and focus groups. Benefit realization strategy. Mechanisms must be installed to monitor achievement of the performance targets. These mechanisms include developing the process, data collection, and reporting requirements for each measure. The components of the benefit realization strategy are assigning owners for each measure and target, determining when and how the measurement data will be collected and the reporting frequency and how information will be shared, creating an approach to address slippage or slow attainment of measure, aligning with the reward strategies, establishing timelines for addressing issues related to achieving the targets, communicating performance targets to the organization. Inputs include the strategic plan, the case for change, change objectives and goals, project charter, and success criteria. Outputs include measurement and benefit realization strategy and revised performance and rewards targets. Next, we'll look at developing the sustainability strategy. The purpose of developing the sustainability strategy is to describe how the change will become part of the organization's normal functioning. It should define a high-level approach for embedding or institutionalizing the change to achieve the expected benefits, include all streams of change management activities such as communication and engagement, metrics tracking, performance management, reward and recognition, learning and development, sustaining ownership, continuous improvement. The sustainability strategy details the approach to embedding the change in the organization once the program has delivered the change. It identifies the sustainability evaluation criteria, including performance metrics, cultural indicators, desired employee customer behaviors, key performance indicators, scorecards, transactional volumes, exception rates, customer satisfaction scores, and employee temperature checks. It may also include sustainment activities for change support functions. The sustainability strategy defines the scope, scale, roles, responsibilities, resource requirements, accountability, and governance structure for the sustainment program. It provides a clear roadmap for maintaining the formal and informal networks or communities of practice that have supported the change initiatives and outlines a long-term plan for ongoing knowledge management. Key inputs to the sustainability strategy are the lessons learned from each phase of the change program. The sustainability strategy should cover communication or ongoing socialization of the change, metrics tracking, performance management, rewards and recognition, linking rewards and recognition to behaviors required by the change, sustained ownership, ensuring experience and knowledge transfer, consistent and effective processes for assessing stakeholder and organizational competencies, and the system structures and mechanisms needed to ensure stakeholders develop the skills and motivation to perform as expected in the changed environment, and continuous process improvement. Inputs include business case for change, change objectives and goals, change risk assessment, project charter and documentation, strategic plan, success criteria and measures, and the output is a sustainability strategy.